my mind will often wander, and sometimes I'll play a video game in my mind.
You're playing
I've
video
done that
games?
before, like where I go back to a game that I've been focused on for the last little while, and I will start creating, like, not even like playing the video game, but like create the weapon in my hands, cycling the weapon, firing the weapon, things like that.
If you enjoy this podcast, show us some love and take a couple minutes to leave a 5-star review. It helps us get found by more listeners, and we greatly appreciate it. Aphantasia is a condition characterized by an inability to visualize mental images in one's mind. If you have just discovered that you or someone you love has aphantasia, or if you're just fascinated by the subject in general and love learning more about it, you are in the right place. The Discovering Your Mind podcast delves into all aspects of the mind's eye, including aphantasia, hyperphantasia, and everything in between. Welcome to the Discovering Your Mind podcast, brought to you by shanesbraindomain.com. I'm your host, Shane Williams, also known as Shane's Brain, and I'm joined today by my son, Cole, who will be my co-host for this episode. How you doing there, Cole?
Good. Excited to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. And today we are talking with the one and only Carl Demille, who is a good friend of Cole, so we're happy to have him. How you doing there, Carl?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here and to learn and discover.
Awesome. So real quick, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do for a living and such?
I'm a mechanic locally, and things I like to do. Obviously, I like working with my hands, fixing things. I enjoy going out shooting, playing video games, and that sort of thing.
All right. Well, let's jump on in there, Cole. In this episode, we will be referring to what we call the apple graph. If you would like to view the apple graph to play along and better understand what we're talking about, you can find it on shanesbraindomain.com in the Aphantasia and Beyond section. If you are unable to view the apple graph for whatever reason, it is a graph divided into 6 sections. In the number 6 section, there is a very detailed image of a red apple. In the number 5 section, it is the same image but with less detail. Number 4 is still in color but has less detail and more basic shapes instead of detailed hues and gradients. Number 3 is the less detailed apple but in gray tones without the color. Number 2 is a simple outline of the apple. And number 1 is blank, indicating no visualization whatsoever. This is called aphantasia.
So I want you to imagine a red apple in your mind.
Okay.
Okay, now we are going to share a picture with you.
You see that?
Yep.
Which one of these apples best represents what you saw in your mind's eye?
Number 6.
Number 6. Have you heard of aphantasia before?
I briefly have come across it a couple of times on a couple of my occasions of doom scrolling on TikTok or Instagram, and learned a little bit of it from there, but my knowledge of it is very limited.
Okay, but you know the basics of what the condition is, the inability to visualize images in one's head.
Yes.
Now what we'd like you to do is imagine a horse in your mind.
Okay.
Is it like looking at a picture or more of just a thought or something else?
In a lot of ways, it's like looking at a picture, but in several ways, I can actually visualize it from different angles and different parts of the horse at different times when thinking about a particular part of the horse. So like if I'm thinking about the hooves, I can visualize the hooves even down to like if they were flipped upside down and someone was shoeing the horse, or the shape and color of the eyes, the things of that nature.
Okay. Just from that, I think you might be what we call hyperphantasia. But I'm going to ask you the rest of these questions, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
So your image of your horse, is it in color or black and white?
It's in color.
Are the colors vibrant or muted?
A little muted. So if I'm trying to visualize the whole horse, it's a little bit harder for me to visualize the horse as a whole in very good detail. It's more of a muted kind of color. But when it comes down to like when I was saying I can visualize the different parts of the animal, it becomes more and more vibrant as I visualize something at a smaller and smaller scale.
Is the image more clear with your eyes closed or your eyes open?
Probably with my eyes open.
Okay. Is it much of a difference? Can you elaborate on it a little?
I just close my eyes again, trying to imagine the horse. That's definitely like I have a harder time visualizing it in my mind's eye with my eyes closed. With my eyes open, it's a lot easier to bring the image to mind.
Do you see the horse in your mind, or is it projected out in front of you?
It's in my mind.
Is the image solid or transparent?
Solid.
Is it 2D or 3D?
Three-dimensional.
Is the image still or is there movement?
It's still.
Can you add movement if you want? Can you make the horse run if you want?
No, not particularly.
Interesting.
Okay. Would you say that's fairly typical when you visualize it's a still image that you can't really add movement to, or is that just in this case?
I think in this case, if it's something that I'm visualizing, just creating, I think it's a lot harder for me to try and make it move and do something. There is, like I said, with like the broader scale, seems like it's harder. But when it comes down to the more narrow scale, it's a little bit easier too. As far as like that goes, it seems like if I'm thinking about it like memories, something that I have seen, I can recreate those scenes and have them move very easily. But when it comes to something that I'm just creating with my mind's eye, it looks like it's a lot harder to create movement with.
Right. So you can bring up a memory of a horse that you've seen running,
yes,
but that's different than manipulating the one that you created. Okay.
Exactly.
When you first imagined the horse, was it isolated or was there a background?
It has a background. As I continue to think about a horse, the background kind of changes. Details about the horse can change until like unless I start describing it and locking it in, it's kind of constantly shifting. Right now, it's kind of a brown horse standing in a grassy field. Maybe there's a fence in the distance where you're looking through over a fence towards the horse is kind of how it's going in my mind right now.
Okay.
So it's almost like a Schrodinger's horse, like it's everything until you decide what it's going to be.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, I like, as I'm thinking about it, I could add white spots to the horse or just continue to keep it like a brown Arabian style horse.
So that's interesting. It seems like you can easily manipulate it in all those other ways, but just not in movement. If it made a sound, could you hear it in your mind?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to talk more about sound in a minute, but let me just read you this definition that I have for hyperphantasia, and you can tell me if it feels like it fits you. It's somewhat vague. It's a little hard to pin down. It says hyperphantasia is the condition of having extremely vivid mental imagery. It has been described as vivid as real seeing. Hyperphantasia is the ability to explore within one's imagination, but at extreme levels. People with hyperphantasia can form very vivid visual images and sensations in their minds. You feel like that describes you pretty well?
Pretty accurately describes me.
Okay. On this one, we want you to imagine an orange on a plate.
Okay.
Okay. Are there variations in color of the orange?
It's pretty uniform. I can see the dimples that an orange typically has, but it's a pretty uniform color across the whole image of the orange.
Okay. Are there any unripe areas or tonal variations?
No.
Okay.
I can add them in as I think about them, but in the initial imagining of the orange, it's a perfectly ripe orange that's sitting on a plate.
Do you imagine a shiny spot?
Yes.
Which direction is the light coming from?
From the left side.
Is there reflected illumination from the plate onto the orange?
No.
Can you zoom into the orange and travel through its skin?
Yes, I can. It's interesting.
Okay. You want to describe what that was like? Can you describe that?
It's just, I kind of create what I would think it would look like to penetrate through the skin into the pulpy area before getting into the flesh of the orange, based on just countless times of peeling and eating oranges.
All right. We now want you to imagine a cup on a table that you accidentally knock over.
Okay.
What type of cup was it?
It's a little plastic cup. They don't really make them anymore. My mom had them in the cupboard for years, since as long as I've lived there. It flares out at the edges. It's green. And yeah, it was full of water when it spilled.
What type of table was it?
I'm actually imagining my dad's, or my mom and dad's dining room table. It's a wooden table with leaf additions that usually stay folded underneath the table. Very well worn, has different stains and things like that in the wood from being burned, from having spills that didn't get cleaned up and have affected the finish of the varnish.
That's a lot of detail.
That is a lot of detail. I didn't give you any of those details. Your mind filled in a lot of those details for you. Is there any particular reason you think your mind immediately went to those items, or do you think it was kind of random?
Well, my mind went to those particular items because I'm very familiar with them from being around it a lot. I'm very familiar with those cups because I used them a lot. The table, because that's where I ate dinner every day for several years. And so my mind has been around it and has memorized a lot of these details about it. And so it's easier for my mind to recreate something that it's very familiar with than it is to create something that it's not familiar with as much.
Yeah, I found it very interesting that, we didn't give you any details at all. And what your brain immediately went to was one of the most detailed descriptions of a table and a cup I have ever heard in my life. Wow. I found that super interesting.
Just to butt in here a second, a lot of time people talk about effort to get a more detailed image. They've got to spend some effort in it. Is there anything like that with you? Do you have to give it effort, or is it just automatically there?
When it came to like the orange and the horse, there was a little bit more effort that was required to create those images, because like I said, I was creating an image not based on memory or anything like that. Just I wasn't bringing up a past horse that I had interacted with. It was creating a unique horse or a unique orange. In this particular case with the cup, for some reason, my mind grasped onto something within memory that it was very familiar with. So it was very effortless for me to create the cup, the water, and the table, because it was all pulled from things that physically exist that I am very familiar with.
All right, going back to the cup, did the sequence appear as a video in your mind or something else?
It did kind of appear as a video in my mind. I could visually see the cup tipping over and the water spilling out.
So with this instance, there was movement then?
Yes.
Did this mental image also have sound? Did you hear it in your mind?
No.
Could you add the sound if you'd like to?
Yes.
Would you say that's typical as well, that a lot of your visualization does not have sound initially, but you can add it if you want?
Yeah, I would say that is typical.
All right. Now, if you would imagine any room in your mind, any room at all. Can you imagine all four walls at once?
No, I'm imagining that I'm standing in the room, so the wall that's behind me I cannot see.
Can you imagine all four walls and all four corners at once?
I can try and create like a top-down view of the room, which is something I've never actually tried to do. But yeah, I can actually create a full like top-down view, seeing all four corners that way.
Can you zoom outside of the room to imagine the entire exterior of the building?
Yes.
What about zoom out further to the entire street or the entire neighborhood?
Yeah, it looks an awful lot like the Google Maps, the images that I've looked at several times.
Okay. Can you zoom out any further, like the entire city?
The further I zoom out, the less detail there is.
Okay.
It's harder to create the whole image. But as starting off in the room, it was very vivid. But as we get further and further back, it's becoming harder and harder to piece any particular thing together because I'm not focusing on any particular thing.
Right.
Okay, so this is all about mind audio. Do you have an inner monologue, and what does that mean to you?
Yes, I have an inner monologue that never stops. It's always chatting. There's something back there at all times that's, in fact, sometimes it feels like there's multiple voices talking at once, but it's not really like necessarily like at once. It's just a thought will interrupt another thought.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. So like there's several thoughts going through my mind, but I can't necessarily focus on any one of them at a time. They just kind of interrupt each other constantly.
Okay, so it's almost like your mind is distracted by itself.
Pretty much, yes. And I think it ties back into, I've never been formally diagnosed with ADHD, but looking into the symptoms and things like that, and I've actually talked to some professionals that they couldn't diagnose me, but I was sitting down with a therapist a while back and describing certain things that frustrated me and why things were like hard for me in certain situations. And she just stopped me mid-sentence and said, "Do you have ADHD?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." She's like, "You're describing textbook symptoms of ADHD." I think that the monologue inside my brain is very much tied to the fact that I may have ADHD.
Would you say that it's in your voice? Is it like hearing your voice?
Yes.
Okay.
And sometimes I'll verbally talk to the voice within my head to kind of think through problems more easily, if that makes any sense.
It does make a little bit of sense to me. I don't know if it makes any sense to you, Dad.
Not really, but I mean, I will talk to myself sometimes. It's not like I'm responding to a voice in my mind because I don't have that, but I do have thoughts.
Yeah.
So I can relate on some level with that.
Okay.
Okay. What does the phrase, "I have a song stuck in my head," mean to you? What's that like?
Oh, so usually when it's a song stuck in my head, it's a part or a riff from the song on repeat the whole time. It's not the entire song. It's usually, like I said, a very small part of the song because my brain can't remember the rest of the song. And so it'll just repeat the certain phrase or the certain like lyrics over and over and over again.
Okay. And you can hear that in your mind, or
Yes.
is it more like something else?
It's I can hear the song in my mind.
On a scale from 1 to 10, how much is it like if you were actually listening to a song on the radio or something?
I would say it's like close to like an 8. I can almost completely render and create the sound in my head, but I can't necessarily create like individual instrument tracks or anything like that from the song or pick out the different instruments that are playing.
Can you hear tonal changes as the melody plays out?
Yes.
Can you hear dynamics in the percussion parts?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Can you change the tempo by speeding it up and slowing it down?
I can.
Can you imagine switching instruments in and out? For example, can you hear a guitar as a trumpet or a bass as a sitar?
No, I can't.
Can you make the singer sound deeper or higher at will?
I think I can, yes.
Can you imagine the song played in a different genre? For example, a metal song played as bluegrass.
Yes.
You can do that?
Yes, I can.
Really?
Like, for example, Master of Puppets by Metallica. I can take that and replace the guitar line with banjo and give it more of a folk sound. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, on an earlier question, though, you told me you couldn't swap out the...
Yeah, because I didn't think I could, but I might. I guess not. These are things that I've never explored, like consciously, if that makes any sense. It's things that I've done before, but I've never consciously like thought about it, if that makes any sense.
That's something really interesting about a lot of the questions we ask is sometimes they're very context dependent. For example, when he asked you to swap out an instrument, that didn't immediately come. But when he asked you to switch a genre, your mind immediately was able to do that. So sometimes the context really enables our abilities.
Yeah. Like when the original question was asking, I wasn't thinking of any particular song, but when I was asked to switch a genre like metal, that locked in my mind a song, and then I was able to see if I could create it into a different way, I guess.
Okay, if you'll allow me, I kind of want to take this a step further, because from guitar to a banjo is a switch, but it's not much of a switch. So I want to go back to Master of Puppets, Metallica. Okay. Can you take the guitar and make it a tuba?
I'm not super familiar with the tuba sound, so it's kind of not very vivid, but a little bit, I guess.
Okay. But if you were more familiar with the instrument, would it be a little bit easier to do that? Like if I were to ask...
I could. So let's say if I'm thinking of a marimba, I can recreate the notes using a marimba, because I'm a lot more familiar with the sound a marimba makes.
Are you a musician?
I played percussion all 4 years of high school. So yes and no. I've been out of practice for so long that I can't really say that I am. And on top of that, I used to mess around with electronic music production. I was never very good at it because I never learned much music theory and can't grasp how to make melodies and create chord progressions. But one thing that I really excelled at was a lot more close to sound design when it came to synthesizers. I got to a certain point, I can't really do it as much anymore, but I got to a certain point where I could visualize a sound that I wanted to create and then tweak the synthesizer until I created a sound very similar to what I was creating in my mind.
The next thing is imagine a chocolate chip cookie in your mind.
Okay.
Can you smell it in your mind?
No.
Okay. What about taste? Can you taste it in your mind?
Yes. Yes, I can.
Okay. On a scale from 1 to 10, how much is it like actual tasting?
I'd say like a 7.
Imagine eating a ripe cantaloupe.
Okay.
Can you taste it?
Yes.
If you switch it to an unripe cantaloupe, can you taste the difference?
Yes.
Can you imagine changing its taste by adding salt and pepper?
Yeah. It becomes a little bit sweeter and a little bit more juicy with the salt. And then the pepper just tastes like I added pepper on top of it.
Can you imagine tasting 2 different flavors at the same time, like a banana and chocolate or ketchup and ice cream?
No, I can't. I can't do that as easily. It would be there to a degree, but it would be a lot further down the scale to be able to create 2 different tastes in my mouth at the same time.
What about the sensation of touch? Can you feel it in your hands or in your mouth?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Again, on a scale from 1 to 10, where are you at?
I'd say like an 8.
Okay.
Maybe even a 9.
Imagine yourself typing on a keyboard. Can you feel the space in between the keys?
Yeah.
Can you feel the pressure and weight of each key as you press down on it?
Yes, I can.
Can you feel the texture of each key?
Yes.
Can you feel the temperature of each key?
No. Okay. Mainly because I've never really thought about the temperature of the keys while pressing them down while typing. It's never been the only
one? Yeah, me neither, but Cole can do that.
Maybe and you're right along with me, and I'm calling us super touchers now, and that's a working title. Maybe super toucher is not a good name for it. But
if I'm thinking about touching something else that like has been hot before, yes, I can definitely feel the temperature of that item. I can even change the temperature of that item as I'm touching it, but I never thought about the temperature of the keys of the keyboard while typing.
Still with the keyboard, imagine that the keyboard is suddenly furry. Can you feel that?
Yes. I'm kind of wondering, like, how furry are we talking about? Is it like a slight fuzz like velvet, or are we talking like a full on, like, there's long follicle hairs on each key?
Well, what did your mind go to?
A mix of both.
Okay.
That's why I'm asking. Is like I was like I can imagine like each key covered in like a velvet, but I can also feel like there's a longer, furrier kind of a feel to the keys. Kind of like
Okay.
those steering wheel covers that you sometimes people put in their cars. They're just covered in fur. I think a lot of it is associated to, throughout the years, I've been very sensitive to, like, I have different sensory issues. Like, I'm very sensitive to certain senses, as well as, like, when things are too bright, things are too loud. I don't like the texture of something. Those certain things kind of stick in my mind a little bit more. When it comes to very textural things, I can feel those a lot more than, say, something that is more smooth and doesn't have a lot of texture. Because I don't like the way that chalkboards feel. I can feel a chalkboard underneath my fingers.
Oh,
and just
so can I.
cringe. I hate that feeling so much.
Ooh, it sends chills down me. Ooh.
Or like when the top of your car, the clear coat gets eroded by the sun, and then you run your hands over that. Another feeling that I just do not like.
You're like, this is like psychological torture.
I can create that feel perfectly as I'm running my hand over it, and it makes my skin crawl. I hate it.
Yeah.
All right, what about this one? Imagine that you grow an extra finger out of your hand. Can you feel it in the same way that you feel your other fingers?
No.
Cole can do that, right? Cole?
Yeah, it takes some effort, but eventually I can will my mind to create an extra finger, give it nerves and blood, and feel it like another finger.
Huh. That is weird. Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I can try and create another finger and almost touch it with my thumb and fingers together. And that's really weird.
Yeah, it is weird. When we were first coming up with these questions and stuff, he asked this to me, and it took me a while. I was like, I'm not sure that this is even plausible, but the more time I gave to it, it was like, oh yeah, there is a finger there.
I mean, I've had vivid dreams where I was someone I was not, right? Or I was, things were different about me physically, and I could feel those physical differences in my dreams, like vividly feel those physical differences, despite never experiencing, like, for example, I've dreamt that I was a female, and I could feel those physical differences despite never having experienced being a female. And it's kind of like my mind's creating it, so I don't actually know what it feels like because I've never done that.
In this episode, we will be referring to what we call the nature picture. If you would like to view the nature picture to play along and better understand what we're talking about, you can find it on shanesbraindomain.com in the Aphantasia and Beyond section. If you are unable to take a look at the nature picture, it is a picture of a grove of tall trees with the sun shining brightly through the trees. There is a blue camping chair next to a peaceful flowing river with a campfire nearby.
Now I'd like you to take a look at that nature picture that I sent you.
Okay.
Can you put yourself in that picture?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see yourself there, or is it more like you are there?
I can both see myself in the picture and try and create the image in front of me, or I can see myself, like, for example, sitting in the chair.
Can you feel the sun on your skin?
Yes.
Can you hear the river?
If I think about it, yes.
Can you smell the campfire?
Yes, I can. I can also hear it crackle and pop as it burns.
When you sit in the chair, can you feel that? Can you feel it under you, or any other sensations of touch with that?
Yes.
How close to reality is all of that? Can you just describe that a little bit more?
I would say it's not hugely close to reality, because in order to, like you said, feel the sun or feel the chair underneath me, hear the river, I have to focus on that particular aspect of the photo to create those sounds and those feelings. I can't necessarily put myself in the chair and experience all of those at once. It's more like one or two of those things at a time.
Share the gift of laughter with your children and grandchildren with books full of funny poetry and silly stories by Shane D. Williams, available on shanesbraindomain.com.
In general, when you close your eyes, what do you see?
Well, it depends on what I'm thinking about at the moment and what's going across my mind. If I'm not thinking about anything, I just see nothing. But if I let my mind wander, it'll start creating images of whatever is currently crossing my mind.
Is there always something visual going on in your mind, or are there periods of blankness?
Usually there's always something visual going on. Unless I'm engaged in something that is taking like cognitive concentration towards that, like there's usually always something. Like, for example, sitting through briefs or like meetings and such, my mind will often wander, and sometimes I'll play a video game in my mind.
You're playing
I've
video
done that
games?
before, like where I go back to a game that I've been focused on for the last little while, and I will start creating like I'm not even like playing the video game, but like create the weapon in my hands, cycling the weapon, firing the weapon, things like that.
Can you think of nothing if you want to?
No, I can't. I've never been able to get to a point of absolutely nothing going through my head.
Okay, and this is where a lot of us that are visualizers tend to become jealous of those with aphantasia. Because,
yes.
I mean, I can let Dad talk more about this, but you and we cannot do this. But he has this magical ability to think of nothing.
Oh, I can go and sit out on my balcony and have zero thoughts going through my mind.
So I've often heard the jokes like when people are like, yeah, man, when they say they're thinking of nothing, they're literally thinking of nothing. And I've never related to that because, I usually say nothing because how do I explain the mass of influx of information that's constantly going through my head, right? There's not a single thread of thought that I'm currently focusing on. It's just kind of all rapid fire going through my head.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easier to just say, yeah, I'm just thinking of nothing. When physically I am not thinking of nothing. I'm thinking of 20 different things running across my mind at the same time. So yeah, I'm very jealous of that.
I think that most women don't believe it when men say that. Probably, I'm sure there's a mix, but with me, my wife said she used to not believe me because I would say that. What are you thinking of? Nothing. Mm-hmm. And she didn't believe me, but now she does. You've been together long enough that she's realized, hey, that's an actual thing.
That's crazy. Yeah, I've never been able to experience that in my life.
Well, I haven't been able to experience anything you've said. So
yeah. It must be fascinating. It's fascinating to me to think about not being able to create these images because it's been a core part of my life since I was very little to be able to do this, and it's kind of developed with me throughout the years. So like that concept of not being able to is just very foreign to me. As I imagine it is, the thought of being able to visualize is very foreign to you.
Do you tend to visualize things you've already seen before, or do you tend to create new and unique images in your head?
Based on what we were talking about earlier with some of the earlier questions, I would say that I tend to create images of things I have seen before because that is much easier for me to do because it's coming from my memory rather than, so it's harder for me to create some things that I've never seen or interacted with. But things that I am familiar with, like especially like things that I'm very familiar with that I've touched, that I've seen, things like that are a lot easier for me to bring into context.
Now we're going to talk about reading. When you read a novel, is it like a movie in your mind or something else?
It's usually like a movie in my mind.
How well can you visualize the characters and the surroundings?
I've never been able to like create an image of the character itself per se. It's that's very hard for me to create in very good detail exactly what the character looks like, even with a really good description. Usually it's like almost like a silhouette of a person. I can sometimes visualize their outfit if that description is very good, but like never facial features or anything like that. But yeah, I can create the action, the sequences like that. I can create a vague resemblance of the world. Say if they're in a hallway, I can create the hallway, especially if it describes if it's made out of stone, things like that. But even with a lot of the details described on page, it's harder for me to put the fine details into those visualizations.
What about the sounds? Do you hear the sounds and the voices in your mind?
No, not necessarily.
When you read, is there any narration that happens in your mind?
Sometimes, yeah.
So is it in your voice? Can you like hear yourself reading the book?
No, sometimes so usually when I'm reading and let's say it's describing what's going on, it's usually in a narrator kind of voice, like from a movie or something like that, or like I'm listening to an audiobook in my head almost. When it comes to like character voices, I can't hear the characters' voices necessarily. It just kind of almost is my voice, if that makes any sense.
You mentioned audiobooks. Do you like audiobooks, and which do you prefer? Do you prefer to read a book or listen to a book?
I prefer to read a book. Listening to books, I often miss more of the details because I will get distracted by other auditory inputs. So there's been times when I've been reading a book or listening to a book and something comes up and I miss like 3 paragraphs. And I have to rewind and listen to again because I missed that, and it's frustrating to me. Whereas with a book, it's a little bit more easy for me to lock in and stay focused, especially if there isn't, like if I'm in a quiet room reading to myself.
All right, let's talk about sleep and dreams, one of my favorite parts. What do you do to fall asleep?
To fall asleep, typically, I lay down, close my eyes, and hope for the best. It depends on the night. Most of the time, my brain has too much going on, and that usually engages me in some way or another and won't let me sleep. Like last night, I couldn't sleep at all last night because my brain was going 100 miles a second, constant dialogue, images, things like that. And it's always worse when I'm trying to sleep. One interesting thing is if there is any kind of external stimulus, it becomes incredibly difficult for me to sleep unless I am very, very tired, like haven't slept in like 2 days, kind of tired.
What do you mean by external stimulus? Like the blanket or like boogeyman grabbing your toes?
No, not necessarily like physical touch, more like, for example, when my computer goes to sleep, the light for the power button will blink, and that blinking light will keep me awake. Because my brain will focus on that blinking light. In fact, I need to unplug that light so that it no longer does that. Another example is my roommate in this other room here will sometimes watch TV, and he's hard of hearing, so it's always blasting loud every time he watches TV, and it bugs the crap out of me. I'm always telling him to turn his stuff down. I've had to text him on multiple occasions, like, dude, it's midnight. Like, what are you watching at that volume at midnight? Like, you have work at 5 o'clock in the morning.
How vivid and detailed are your dreams?
I've had dreams to the point where, like, I woke up and started doing in my dream, I woke up and started doing my day-to-day activities. And then when I actually woke up, I was very frustrated because I hadn't done any of that yet and was still asleep. So it was so vivid to the point where I didn't realize that I was still asleep.
Okay, would you say by and large that that's how your dreams are, that they're so real you think it's reality?
No, it depends on the state of my sleep, how deep sleep is, as well as like what's going on necessarily in my dream. I've had very, very vivid dreams with a lot of detail down to touch, sight, feel, sound, all of that. And then I've had other dreams where it's just kind of more, I can remember parts and things of it. And I'm sure it was vivid at the time, but I can only remember parts and pieces that it's very hard to piece together, that there's no context. And it's just very hard to, as far as that goes. So it varies night to night.
Are your dreams in first person or third person?
It can be both.
Does it tend to switch between the two depending on
Sometimes.
The night, or does it switch within the same dream?
I've had it switch within the same dream before. Yeah.
All right. See, that's something I don't experience. So that's interesting.
It's a very interesting feeling being able to look at yourself in the third person, yet still controlling what you do.
And I think that ties into that video game aspect.
Yeah, I guess it does.
Is your dream experience different from how you visualize when you're awake?
Yes, in a lot of ways. Usually it's more vivid than what I can visualize in person. where there's parks, there's trails that just don't exist in real life, and they are very, very vivid, like parks and trails that I can visualize. Because I've had the dreams multiple times, I can actually bring up those same images and that same kind of feeling right now. And it's like my brain's like, but that's not how the actual place looks. That's not how it is at all, because it doesn't exist.
It really seems like that visualizing side of you really comes to life when you're dreaming.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. How well do you remember your dreams?
Usually my dreams are gone before I've been awake for 10 minutes. The best way to try and remember your dreams is to actually write them down immediately after you have them and give them unique titles and unique things that will trigger those memories of that dream. But I haven't done that in so long that, I usually can't remember my dreams at all.
Okay. Is there a correlation between how vivid the dream is and how well you remember it?
Yes. The more vivid and more detail the dream gives me, the easier it is for me to recall.
All right. We're going to move on to memory. If you want to recall a memory, can you see it in your mind?
Yes.
Would you say it's like reliving the memory or just watching it or something else? Can you describe it?
Most of the time, it's me reliving the memory. I have a lot of coping mechanisms that lock memories and make them harder for me to access because of traumatic experiences that I need to go to therapy for a lot of this, and I just haven't. Depending on what the memory is associated with, it makes it harder for me to bring in the memory and visualize it and things like that. But like happy memories and distinct memories can come very easily. For example, I was about 2 years old. I can still remember all the details, throwing this blanket over my head, spinning in a circle and burning my hand on the wood burning stove we had in the living room. I branded the mountain logo onto my left hand. At the time, there's no scarring left anymore. But yeah, I remember literally branding my hand with that logo. But when it comes to more recent memories, some of them are just like, I can't even recall hardly any of the details.
Okay. You talked about blocking out some memories because of trauma.
Yes.
Would you say you consciously tried to do that, or was it something your brain just did?
It's something my brain just kind of did. It's a lot harder for me to bring those memories to the forefront of my brain because my brain doesn't want to process the emotions and the other things that are associated with that memory.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is because I've kind of stumbled upon that more recently, where a lot of people are describing that, where their experiences, whether it be memory or other experiences, are changed based on trauma. And it's almost like the brain is just taking care of us. Like, I'm going to alter this thing just because I like you. Kind of. It's almost what it feels like to me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's like, we're trying to survive here, so we're going to lock this down so you don't have to deal with that and you can focus on what's going on right now. That's one of the reasons I want to go to therapy, is to find ways to be able to open those memories and process the emotions associated with them, rather than locking down the emotions and trying not to feel them. With me, when it comes to memory, emotions are a very strong part of it. So when I bring up those traumatic memories, a lot of those emotions associated with that will come with it.
So do you experience your memories in first person or third person or both?
Typically first person.
Can you do it in third person if you want?
It's a lot more difficult to do because for me, I'm the one experiencing the memory. And so it's a lot harder to put me in a third person kind of perspective because I don't really know exactly what I looked like from a third person perspective in that particular setting.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. But I have interviewed people that say that their default is third person.
Interesting.
And that just, it doesn't make any sense to me. But
that doesn't make any sense to me either.
Everybody's so unique. That's what's so cool about this.
Yeah. Sometimes if I'm thinking about like a particular memory, I can almost view things from a distance. Like, hey, it took place in this place, and I can place certain key things. It's really hard to place myself in a third person situation, but I can place a lot of the other things in a third person kind of way. But like I said, that's not my default.
All right, we're going to talk about mind storage. How would you describe how your mind stores information?
Most information that is stored is visual. If you're trying to give me description of, like, if you give me a list of instructions on how to get from point A to point B, I will forget those as soon as I get on the road. Like words and like writing, it doesn't translate very well for me. As far as storing the information, yeah, it's a lot of it is visual storage of different things. Let's say on a more academic side, like I'm doing math or something like that. Mm-hmm. If I'm doing math and I don't have like calculator aids and stuff like that, and the scratch paper, and I don't remember the formulas or whatnot or how to do it, a lot of times I will literally visualize the numbers in my head and like do the paper. Like if I don't have a scratch paper, I'll literally visualize the numbers and do the math, almost like I'm like putting them on a paper in my mind and doing the math.
Do you associate your mind with an area or space?
No, it's usually like everything's kind of like almost kind of imagine a void of blackness, and then just everything's created within that. You know, as I try and visualize that those things are put into that nothing as I create them.
Would you say there are any different rooms or compartments in your mind?
No, not necessarily.
It's all just one big void.
It's like one. I want to say it's like a void. It's more like a galaxy. Like there's a lot of open, empty space, but a lot of things are going on at the same time, and I can travel to the different points at any given time. But they're also intersecting and moving constantly. Actually, more or less like a galaxy, more like let's say like it's an atom, right? With a lot of electrons that are just zipping around and intersecting and doing whatnot all the time. And I'm just kind of there, and it's like everything's going. So it's less like a void, more like constant thoughts. And I can create a void and then put things in there. But if I'm not thinking about like that way, it's just all the time, everything.
Okay, that's a pretty unique description.
It's really hard to describe because it's just my mind.
It's one of those things that is really difficult to describe sometimes because we don't often think like, okay, how is my mind functioning? You know, it just does.
Yeah.
What does the phrase "search your mind" mean to you? What's that like?
That's something that's hard for me to grasp, because when I hear "search your mind," I'm thinking like my brain tries to visualize physically searching through something, right? But my mind is something that I don't actually do that with. I don't search through my mind. When you ask me like to search through your mind for something, that's hard for me to grasp. But if you say, pick out this memory or this thing, that it will immediately be at the forefront of what I'm thinking about. I guess, you know, the way searching my mind would just be like going through different memories of that thing or that person until I find the information that I'm looking for in a memory. Like, for example, with someone's name, you know, I can go through my mind. I'm like, oh, right, that's what their name is based on all of these memories that I have with them, kind of a deal.
Okay.
So I guess that would be how I search my mind, is just by going through a list of memories with that thing or that person or whatnot to associate with the thing that I'm looking for.
Okay, cool. Good description. Is there anything else you want to say about how you visualize affects how you perform in your career or your hobbies?
There's part of me that just really loves to know how things fit together, how things work together to create a system, right? And so let's say I'm working on an engine and there's a problem with it. I'm able to almost like, once I start finding more and more symptoms, based on those symptoms, my mind will actually piece together what I think is the problem. And I can almost, you know, see those things being the problem and whatnot. Yeah, I would say that it actually helps me a lot with my job, because I like to picture how the things fit together, how they work together to create the whole functioning system.
So would you say that you can actually solve the problem in your mind before you solve it in real life?
I wouldn't say necessarily, but in some cases, yeah. It depends on what I'm working on, what I'm looking at, things like that, and how familiar I am with the system. And especially nowadays, with a lot of things being more and more electrical, it's harder to visualize an electrical system.
Okay, what about school? Did you do well in school, or do you struggle?
So when it came to testing, I usually did pretty good when the test came around. But as far as like individual assignments, I had a harder time, and I struggled with those a lot to be able to get done.
Do you think your visualization abilities played any role in any of that?
In the testing portions, I think so a lot, yes. As far as like the reason I struggled with like my individual homework assignments and different assignments like that, I think is more tied to the ADHD, having a hard time focusing, those sorts of things like that.
If you were to try to give a general description of how your mind works and what you see in your mind's eye, how would you describe it?
I actually like the bowl of sand analogy the best. It's kind of like a bowl of sand where all the thoughts are kind of going at once. And let's say that's constantly in motion. But there's also the fact that I can just bring forward memories, images, things like that on demand at any given moment. When I'm not actively doing that, however, it's just a constant jumble of thoughts and images and things like that go on at the same time. So I think in a lot of ways, my mind is very visual when it comes to information and storing information and receiving information and those sorts of things. There is also the ability, the other things that I have where I can associate things with taste, sound, hearing, or I say that like feel. But for the most part, it's a very visual kind of experience.
That is pretty much it. Is there anything else you'd like to ask, Cole?
My mind keeps twitching because I keep imagining the chalkboard feel.
Oh. Yes.
I can't get it out of my head now, and my mind's just like, stop it.
Yeah. It's a very interesting thing. I remember watching, I used to watch a YouTube channel called Game Theory, Film Theory, that sort of thing. And one of the videos he touched on was along those lines where he showed that external stimuli can actually change what your mind perceives. And an example he gave was like, all right, you like close your eyes and rub your hands together, and he played a sound of your hands like a wet kind of rubbing sound, and immediately my hands became very sweaty and like wet feeling. And then he's like, okay, now you don't like that feeling. He says, rub your hands again with your eyes closed, and he played a sound of something more dry rubbing together, and my hands dried up almost because the way that the sound worked actually changed the way I perceived my hands, the feeling on my hands. It was fascinating.
The mental sensory world is very interesting, and I found it's very connected to my feelings of like stress and anxiety as well. Is like certain like mental feelings and sensations are like go hand in hand with that feeling of like anxiety. I'm actually super excited to hear that we have a lot of similarities in how we do things.
That's really interesting.
Like, I mean, I have a few differences. I don't visualize as well as you do, but I'm like a 4 on that Apple scale we showed you.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can get up to a 5, but not much past that.
Interesting. Yeah. Like when we were playing D&D, for example, even though we have the visual aids, a lot of the time, I'm only using that to move my character or like interact with everything else that's going on. But when Ethan's describing things, I am visualizing the description rather than what's on the screen before me.
So am I. It's a full fantasy experience.
Yeah,
in that
exactly.
case.
Exactly. Yes.
And I love. We talked about this in my interview with my dad, where I was the one being interviewed. Where I like the feelings associated with playing D&D. Like I can feel like stabbing people and like feeling the weight of the weapons and all the different things. I love that whole aspect and the whole thing. That's one of the main reasons I play it, is because I love to explore those sensations.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, that's it. Thank you so very much. It was really interesting. You had a lot of great descriptions and details there. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Carl.
I discovered a lot of what I actually was interested in when I first came to, when we first discussed me coming here and doing this. I wanted to help kind of learn and discover how my head, the way I think is compared to other people. And I've never really, cognitively or like thought about a lot of this before. It's just, things that I've experienced throughout my time, and that's normal to me. I've never actually looked at it almost from an outside perspective.
Right.
Which is how this kind of feels, is looking at the way my brain works from an outside perspective.
Right. That's why I called the podcast Discovering Your Mind, because it really is that way. You go into stuff you never really thought about. All right. Well, have a good evening, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Sounds good. We'll talk to you later.
See you, Carl.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, follow, and engage with us, and share it with your friends and family as we continue to explore this fascinating subject. For additional information about this episode or Shane's Brain, check out the show notes. Thanks for listening to the Discovering Your Mind podcast. You are beautifully unique.